Danny Nathan is the founder of Apollo 21, a consultancy that combines product design and venture studio services to drive innovation and growth. In this episode, Danny shares his career journey and how his consultancy practice has evolved. He talks about the barriers to innovation in larger organizations, the importance of taking risks, and why companies need to adopt a venture capital mindset to succeed in today's market. We also cover topics like venture-backed companies, AI, remote work, and problem solving. Danny explains how companies can adapt to disruption, clears up common misconceptions about AI, and emphasizes the importance of well-structured automation. He also discusses the value of trust and accountability in remote work and how he finds joy in solving unique challenges.
Probably 7 years into my career before I caught the entrepreneurial bug. So I started my career in advertising on the creative side. Long story short, within 2 years of that, realized that the most fun you're ever going to have doing advertising is in ad school. And the realities of working in advertising professionally just didn't do it for me personally. Let's put it that way. And so I took it upon myself to find a path out of the world of advertising. Almost went back for a second master's degree, almost left the country to go, explore the world and find myself. And before I had a chance to do either of those things, I ended up landing a job at an innovation consultancy here in New York. And that proved to be a massive turning point in my career. It was the first place that I had worked that really believed in the potential for technology to have an impact on the relationship between brands and people, and proved to be my introduction into the worlds of technology and startups and entrepreneurship, and was really the first place that I had ever worked where folks were willing to say no to potential clients. We think it should be this, and if you're not into that, that's totally fine, but perhaps we aren't the best partner for you. And so that was just a huge learning experience for me all the way around. And that kind of kicked off my entrepreneurial bug. And so I spent about 5 years there helping a huge range of companies do all sorts of weird stuff. So anybody from early stage startups who are trying to get a new product off the ground and trying to figure out how to sort of present it to the world, all the way up to, Fortune 100 organizations. I worked with American Express to launch some new products. I worked with Dyson to launch their bladeless fan product when it first came out, and a bunch of other companies that you and most of the world have heard of. And then ultimately left because I was getting a little tired of doing that for other people and really wanted to take the opportunity to do it for myself. So I left that job, started my first company, and have been running down that entrepreneurial path ever since.
Nice. And kind of judging by the products that you named there, so the Dyson bladeless fan, this is probably the 2010s maybe that you're doing this?
Ooh, good call. Yes. So I started that job late 2007 and I left right at the end of 2012. And so it was a really interesting time to land in a company of that sort, because for those of us who are old enough, sort of cast our memories back, that was literally right when the iPhone came out, and therefore then encompassed the launch of the App Store and everything that went along with that. It was the foundational period of social media where people were suddenly, learning what social media was, and everybody was tweeting, what are you doing right now? I'm sitting on the toilet, or whatever their first tweet was. And it was a really interesting time to get involved in the space and to think about how those technologies were changing, as I said, the interactions between brands and people and consumers, and what it meant for everything from access to knowledge on the go to how we expected to be served by companies as consumers. And it laid the groundwork for expectations around how fast things were going to be delivered to us, either digitally or physically, and all sorts of things like that. So, Zappos was making waves for their forays into customer service. Amazon was growing out of the world of books. Facebook was opening its doors to people who weren't in college. LinkedIn was just becoming a thing. And so, it was It was a really interesting time.
Yeah, I had a good kind of accurate guess there because I remember first seeing the Bladeless Fan and I was
Yeah.
thinking, right, okay, that was well over a decade ago, so somewhere around there. And like you
Yes.
said, this was a really monumental time in the space of tech. And so to be doing
Yeah.
consultancy then, no one would have any kind of tech in their kind of business. Maybe they would have a computer. Realistically, you'd hope they had a website, but there was all that low
Right.
hanging fruit of like, well, are you on social media? They probably weren't. Okay, you should get on social media. Are you doing all this
Yes.
paperwork digitally? And I don't know how advanced it was, say then, but now even there's people that aren't implementing tech into their business, and it's like there's a tool
Yeah.
or a thing that you could use that will make this 10 times easier or make the person doing the job have it
Or we'll do it for you. Yeah.
exactly that.
Yes.
So transitioning out of that kind of consultancy there, where you were an employee, you started doing your own thing. So did you kind of go, right, the skills I've got, I'm not an ad man anymore. Ads are not for me. I'm a consultancy guy now. Was that what you went into straight away, is doing consultancy, or did you try some other things here and there?
I jumped from advertising into the consulting world by accident, to be honest. As I said, I got really frustrated with the world of advertising, and I kind of knew what my skill set was. I had given myself a crash course in the new wave of thinking, if you will, and I read a huge stack of books that helped kind of open my eyes to the notion that I wasn't the only one that was frustrated by in this case, making TV spots and magazine ads that were designed to do nothing more than interrupt your favorite television show to scream at you so that you would try and, buy something that you probably didn't want. And that always bothered me. Like, spending my entire career making things that disrupted people's lives in a negative way to try and sell them something from a company that they likely weren't interested in was like the foundation of all my frustrations in the world of advertising. And so I started applying to anywhere that was not an ad agency that might somehow align to my skill set. And so I was applying to digital agencies, were probably the closest that I got to that world. And to be clear, at the time, there very much were ad agencies and digital agencies, and they were, there was a hard line between the two. I started applying to design companies and just all sorts of random places where I thought there might be something interesting happening. And I don't remember exactly where I found it. It was, I think I read an article or a blog post or something like that. But the company that I ended up working with for about 5 years was called Poke, like Poke. And I read about them somewhere and I just sort of went, oh my God, like that you guys are thinking the way that I believe in. And so, I did that thing that everybody tells you to do that's always really hard and, half the time never works, which was I sent a random cold email to whoever's email address I could find at Poke and basically just said, hi, I'm Danny. I think you guys are awesome. I kind of feel like I might fit. Hi. And, fortunately for me, they were nice enough to reply to my email. And, ultimately what I found was that they were an amazing group of people. And one of the founders there, a guy by the name of Tom Agello, who, turned into a huge mentor for me in my career, opened their doors to me, invited me to come hang out with the team one evening. They, at the time, were doing weekly happy hours. And so I went and just sort of like walked into this office full of people and went, hi, I'm here. What can I do? And ended up sticking around. So, I ended up spending 5 years there. At the time, I think I was hire number 7 or something. And so they were a very young company. I had a huge opportunity to impact the way that they were doing work, the way that they were thinking about and responding to clients, and really had an opportunity to get my hands on clients and work that, had I stayed the path of advertising or even gone to a more traditional consulting company, they probably wouldn't have let me near for, another 10 years. And instead, Tom was dragging me into conference rooms with, the C-suite of Fortune 100 companies and, kind of handing me the microphone and going, okay, well, meet James Dyson. What would you like to tell him about his new fan and how are we going to launch it to the world? And I sat around a table with James Dyson and 5 other people and we strategized the launch of that new product globally, and it was such an amazing experience that I was incredibly fortunate to have.
Yeah, I mean, working at startups is one of the best ways to gain experience, especially if you're someone who's just willing
Yes.
to get, stuck in. So if you're willing to just get things
Yes.
going and be like, oh, don't worry, I'll do that. Don't worry, I'll do that. Or how can I help? That is the best way to not only learn, but build a skill set that is so valuable, either if you go to work somewhere else in the future or as a part of the company as it grows and all that kind of stuff. But in your case, you were like,
Yeah.
right, not so much like I've seen enough here, but I think I should go out and go my own way. And so is that when you started Apollo 21, or is that
No,
okay?
no, no, no. There was a pretty big gap in there. So I left Poke in 2012. Started my first company with my then girlfriend, now wife, which was called Date Night Is.
Good choice.
And thank you. We had met online, and this was pre Tinder, pre swiping, pre mobile apps, and so the online dating experience was very different from what it looks like today. And we had this realization of, there's a lot of people that are starting to meet online. And then you kind of get to this point, as we said, when you go from being I to being we, when you hit that point in a relationship where you go from I to we and you start sort of deleting your dating app profiles, there was nothing that was technology driven at the time that was there to support people in relationships who wanted to continue dating and sort of, understood the value of technology within a relationship, but didn't know where to go from dating app to relationship app. And so Date Night is aimed to solve that problem for couples in established relationships by reminding them to continue dating one another, helping them come up with dating ideas, things of that nature. And so that was my next foray and venture. I ended up bouncing around a number of different startups over the next few years, usually in some sort of head of product role. And so I worked with a company that was focused on building AI for video. So we were building human in the loop computational understanding of video along the timeline. So imagine deep metadata across the length of a video going, okay, in this moment they're talking about Ferraris, and in this moment they're talking about soap and whatever. So that was really interesting, and that led to a shift over to the West Coast at Legendary Pictures, where at the end of my first week, the CEO announced his departure, and I was part of a little SWAT team in the technology arena that reported pretty much directly to the CEO, and we had no idea this was coming. So the Friday of my first week, our little 6-person team all kind of looked at one another and went, okay, now what? And 4 of us left that team and started a company in LA called Sear, which was, again, focused on technology around video, this time mostly around distribution of large video libraries and kind of management of video content and things like that. And to make a long story short, the last year of my tenure there, I spent kind of operating a little SWAT team where I was helping other companies in the investment portfolio with their technology needs and helping them use technology to solve problems, for lack of better terms. And that led to the creation of Apollo 21 in early 2021.
Yeah. I feel like once you start working for other people, once you work for other people for a long time and start to get higher up the ladder, you start to see like, hey, how much is this client paying? And how much of that gets to me? I'm thinking, hey, hang on. I could take a bit more of this pie if I went out on my own. So I assume that's kind of where you got to. Where you're like, I've got the skills. I can teach other people how to do, the jobs that are, necessary to make sure I'm able to do what I need to do. And so you went from there. And one thing I don't want to skip over is that you had, various startups in the build up to where you're at now, which is, a common sign of entrepreneurship. It's either you start a business and it flies, or you start a business and it doesn't fly, and you start another business and maybe that doesn't fly. You start another business and you go, right, this time, those 2 mistakes, I'm going to learn from those. And that doesn't work out. But then eventually, if you just keep going, you eventually fall into an idea that works. And one thing I like about the businesses you've mentioned is they're all very niche. They had a very niche problem to solve, and I'm sure they kind of had good customer bases or had good user bases. But where you're at now, you've kind of combined all your learnings and all your skills over the years into one thing. So it's a consultancy practice. There's product design, and there's also the kind of venture studio aspect. So if you can kind of talk me through the
Yes.
the three pillars there of Apollo 21, starting out with the consultancy and then going into the rest of it.
Yeah, you've really nailed it. I mean, it really is kind of the culmination of my career's worth of experience in all of the areas that I've played in, and so I like to tell people that we sit right at that intersection. And for me, the consulting angle comes in around we have a problem that we're trying to solve and we can't quite figure out how to crack it, or we think there's an opportunity for a new product that we could bring to market that aligns to as I like to say, what we have licensed to publish. And I don't mean publish in terms of words or books or anything, but just in terms of, what do we as an organization have the right to put out into the world that aligns to the brand that we have built over time. And that has grown into helping companies launch entire new ventures, or to take that a step further, launch venture building practices, which is where the kind of venture studio side of thing comes in. And so generally what will happen is somebody will come to us with one of those things. The evaluative consultatory part of it will then lead to okay, cool. You have this problem. We think that, we need some sort of technology that does X, Y, and Z to help solve that problem. And we can either help to find that technology, or we can design and build that technology if it either doesn't exist, or if it doesn't exist in the way that, somebody envisions it working best for them. And then if we're going to build a new thing to solve a problem, eventually there's, as often as not, the opportunity to then build the organization around that thing so that that thing can live on and become a business or a company, as opposed to just a product or a hobby. And so that's kind of the progression of things, and the way that they all line up and marry to one another is that the consulting is all about problem solving and opportunity definition. The product design is all about the creation of the thing that solves the problem or the opportunity. And then the venture studio side of the business is all about, okay, well, you built a thing. How do we now turn that into a business? How do we then, create a company out of that that has the potential for longevity, et cetera? And so I want to be a little bit careful in all of this, because as I'm describing it, it might sound like all we do then is launch startups, for example. And we do that through the venture studio side of our business, where we will ideate and launch and then own and manage a product and a company around it for ourselves. But often the consulting side of our business is focused on mid to enterprise sized companies that are at a later stage in their life cycle. And often the problems that they're coming to us with are, we're starting to see sales stagnate, or we're starting to feel the pressure from outside disruptors. How do we reinvigorate that entrepreneurial spirit that we started with, the practice of innovation within our own walls, so that we, instead of becoming the incumbent that was then disrupted and disappeared, but rather we can maintain the longevity of our organization and think about how we can build something new that continues to solve customer needs, so that we as an organization can continue to grow or pivot in a new and interesting direction that aligns to the opportunities that we see today. And so a lot of that work is working with larger organizations to understand what are the cultural impacts and changes of focusing on innovation. What do we need to do today so that tomorrow we are better situated to explore and experiment at the edges? And then how do we operationalize those changes so that that then becomes how our company moves forward, as opposed to the alternative of innovation theater, which you see a lot of companies talking about innovation, talking about the things that they're trying or doing, but then not really living up to that when you sort of peer behind the curtain.
Yeah, you're 100% right there. I mean, a lot of people are very resistant to innovation. They'll talk about it and they'll say, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but nothing ever really happens. And the problem is with
Yeah.
innovation is realistically there's, to oversimplify it, there's having people problems and there's having profit problems. And realistically, if you're not making the right profit, it's probably because you haven't got the right people. If you haven't got the right people, you're not making, that's a very simple kind of view of it. But at the end of the day, if you innovate and bring, certain tech solutions or certain product offerings into your business, you're going to solve both problems because the right people will flock to you and the profit will be right because your market offering is so good. So I'm wondering for you, what are some of the kind of common barriers to entry you see for people to adopt innovation? I know you're talking about mid-sized businesses because obviously for startups, hopefully they're innovating all the time so that they can grow and scale. But
Right.
once you hit that kind of mid to large company scale, it's like, well, we're going to keep it the same because that's what's worked. That's what's got us here. No more changing things now because if this breaks, there's a lot of things that can go wrong here. But yeah, talk to me about the certain things
Yes.
that people are, coming up against when it comes to innovation.
You have absolutely nailed it in what you've just said. The reasons that we see the ideals of innovation stagnating within larger organizations come down to how those organizations optimize for today as they begin to find and establish what product market fit looks like for them. And so what happens is, you start as a disruptive startup, you're running up against the incumbent, whatever, and you find something new that works and you start doubling down on what works. And I'm not saying by any means that you shouldn't double down on what works, especially when you're in that position of being the disruptor. But the problem that you run into is as companies grow and as they become larger, potentially as they become publicly traded, etc., you begin to align your organization to metrics that optimize for risk mitigation, for conservation of capital, holding on to money for as long as possible so that it can grow, for example, by being invested or whatever the case may be. You operationalize efficiency as much as possible. How can we make sure that every penny that goes in produces as much in output as humanly possible? And all of those goals are at direct odds with what is required to really establish a culture of innovation. So innovation happens when we are looking for things that we can change. How do we experiment? What's happening just beyond the edges of today's business that we could embrace, that we could operationalize to make ourselves better for tomorrow? And that requires a lot of experimentation. It requires people who are dedicated to paying attention to what's happening out in the world of technology, in the market, in terms of disruptive companies that are coming to eat your lunch, etc. And the act of paying attention, the act of experimenting, the act of trying new things, and ultimately, in many cases, failing along the way, costs money. It is not a capital efficient use of funds because you have to try, you have to be willing to fail, you have to figure out what works and what doesn't. And so the idea of experimentation at a cost gets erased as you go through the process of seeking efficiency and mitigating risk, etc. And so you end up with this tug of war between the metrics that guide highly established companies in terms of quarterly earnings, annual reports, shareholder value, things like that, that are at direct odds with experimentation at a cost and learning and living at the edges so that you can figure out what might come next. And so when those two things are at odds, the default, resting position then becomes risk mitigation and the lack of innovation because those things are viewed as bad. And the problem is that in order for innovation to offer the type of return on investment that will ultimately convince companies that innovation is a good and valuable thing, takes a long time. So it doesn't align to quarterly earnings reports or even annual earnings reports. It requires failure. If you're going to try 100 things, you're probably going to get 98 of them wrong, one of them kind of right, but it's that last one. It's the one thing that you absolutely unexpectedly nail that is going to return so much value, and I mean exponential value, to the point that it will pay for all of the other failed experiments and plenty more, that takes a while to get to, and that companies are uncomfortable riding out the risk until you find that one thing. And so that's kind of the tug of war, or the seesaw that you end up with. And in my opinion, at least, that's why innovation fails. And that's why companies talk a lot about innovation without actually then living up to it.
And part of your
Pardon the diatribe.
and part of your philosophy there is to also be like a venture-backed company, because venture-backed companies know that they've got £100 million in the bank, or $100 million in the bank, that they can invest into their business. And if they lose it, who cares? Because it's there to be used, type of thing. But I would like to hear your kind of description of how, as a business, you can become more of a venture-minded kind of corporation.
I'm actually going to challenge that a little bit. I'm not pushing for the idea of venture-backed companies. There are plenty of them. Those are generally the startups, the ones who are being disruptive and who are putting the pressure on and scaring the pants off of the companies that already exist. And what I'm driving at more specifically is those companies that already exist. And the ones that are being challenged are the ones that already have capital at their disposal. They have deep coffers because they've been operating efficiently for years. They have the advantage of having rooms or floors or buildings full of people whose jobs it is to understand a customer and their needs, and to figure out how you can fulfill on those needs for those customers, potentially in new and unique and interesting ways. And so if you want to take those kinds of risks, you can change the culture and the operations of your company to allow for those risks to happen internally. You can create an internal venture team, venture studio, whatever, and sort of put them off to the side, which can and does work very well when it is set up correctly. And by that, I mean, you can't create a venture studio internally and then hold that venture studio to the same requirements that you do the rest of the organization, because the processes that are designed around efficiency and around execution are vastly different than those that are designed around learning and experimentation. And so if you're going to set up that venture studio, you have to give those people the permission to break some of the rules and to experiment beyond the edges of what might fly normally within the walls of the org, which is why we often see those venture studios being stood up as sort of unique subsidiaries or in their own office outside of the walls of the primary organization, etc. And just the act of setting up that venture studio and giving people that freedom can be really scary for big companies for all the reasons that we've just talked about, because it goes highly against what they are designed to do and to succeed at. And so if, as an organization, as a company, and as an executive suite, you're not ready to take the plunge of, we're going to stand up a venture studio and give people permission to go experiment and fail and play and break our processes, there are still other ways to get involved. You can partner with up-and-coming startups who, would probably love to have access to the breadth of consumers that you have, to the technology that you have spent years building, probably, etc. You can invest in those companies if you don't want to partner with them directly, so that as an organization, your risk is financially oriented, but it is deployed in a method that enables the disruption in the places where that disruption is most likely to happen in the world of startups. There's lots of different things that you can do to kind of play in that space. And so whether you're partnering, whether you're investing, or whether you're building your own venture studio to make it all happen of your own accord, there are sort of ways and levels and variations, and they can work together. You can pick one and then expand, or you can Pick one and focus on it entirely. But that then gives you the permission to play in that sort of venture-oriented space where maybe it's not all your money that then, defines success or failure if you're one of a number of investors in a young startup, for example, or maybe it's not a financial investment at all. Instead, it's a people capability and supply chain investment. I'm making it up, but there's lots of different ways that if you get creative about what it means to pursue innovation, the world is your oyster. And you can do that however you want. It doesn't have to look like we're going to go spin up a new product in a new company and whatever. It could be as simple as writing a check.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of businesses now, when they hear the word innovation, they're going to mention AI. They're going to go, oh, we need AI, man. We need AI involved in our business because, everyone else is using it and it's working better and it's going to do this and do that and save me money. So as an expert here on tech solutions and all this kind of stuff, talk to me about your current stance on AI and AI as a tool for innovation.
AI is undoubtedly going to change the world. Full stop. However, we often hear clients coming to us saying, AI is happening. Oh God, we're behind the 8 ball. What do we do? We need AI. And the reality is, in fact, I believe I just posted this on LinkedIn today. I'm pretty firmly of the belief that most companies who think they need AI today don't. Because the way that most people think about AI is driven by what we've seen in the movies and maybe a little bit of what we've experimented with on ChatGPT or something like that. But the unfortunate reality is that in spite of having spent the last decade with a big data mindset where we're suddenly collecting everything into these huge data lakes, most companies' data is not structured in a manner that will support AI that is customized and personal to their organization yet. And so the reason that I say you probably don't need AI is that the problems that a lot of companies are trying to solve that they think requires AI can often be solved with careful thought and well-structured automation, for example. I want work to flow more efficiently through my organization, and I want the system to know who to deliver a task to at any given time and when it's most appropriate. AI might be able to help with that. AI can help with that. I mean, let's be clear, but it is not necessary to make that happen. We have deployed a ton of automation solutions for companies that don't require AI at all. They just require the hard work of sitting down and understanding that if person A has access to client 1 and person B has access to client 2 and so on and so forth, and this person is a junior and that person has the right to approve something and this person can take this action, you can structure all of that information in a way so that when this task comes through the system and it is related to this client and it is necessary for this to happen, you can put it in front of this person because they have the right access to this client, they have the level of expertise and permissions to execute on the task, and once they're finished with it, it will go to the next person because that person is the person dedicated to this client whose job it is to do whatever. And yeah, it's a lot of work. Great. We all do a lot of work. And so if you take the time to think about all of the work that goes into, all right, what does that flow look like at every step? You can build a system that requires no AI whatsoever that will have massive impacts on productivity, on the structure of your team, on how many people you need to hire, on how quickly work can be accomplished, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not blowing smoke. I mean, we have deployed this. I have deployed automation systems that have cut internal emails by 90+%. I have deployed systems that handle thousands of financial transactions a day using just careful automation and people and so on and so forth. And then if you layer into that the basics of AI, so, okay, we've got all the automation in place. How do we then look at what we can buy in terms of off-the-shelf AI that can then layer onto that and make each of the unique human-driven tasks easier? Then you can start introducing people to the possibilities of AI. And as we go through all of that work, the other thing that we're doing in the background is digging through the data, understanding how it's structured, looking at where the opportunities are, building the models that can utilize the existing data set, and then training those models based on the data at our disposal, so that by the time the automations are up and running and working well, etc., and into the future, we can start to think about AI. And it's that moment of, everybody looks at it and goes, I want AI. It's here. I should be able to have it tomorrow. And the answer is you can. You can go sign up for ChatGPT and start using AI tomorrow. You can take an open source LLM and bake it into your company's software and start using that 2 days from tomorrow. Whatever, slightly more time. But if what you really want is a new brain that is embedded inside of your company's data, it takes time. Because much like a child has to learn, your new AI brain also has to learn. And so you can't expect for that brain to learn and then be able to act on everything that you want tomorrow. You have to figure out what you can do today that will make tomorrow easier, so that in N amount of time, when that brain is ready to start helping you and getting smarter, then all of a sudden you have this cohesive system where you can go, oh, wow, okay, we have automation that makes our jobs easier. We have Gen AI systems that can plug into things that are relatively easy to use. And we're building our own AI models so that in the future, the AI is ours and it's not just some generic thing that we've layered into the massive collection of data that we've been collecting for a decade.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of people are, like I said, AI crazy right now, but realistically, it's not what they need. But flipping from the kind of business owner or the C-suite kind of making demands, I want to go to the employee side and the innovation for the employee. The current employee is like, if it ain't remote work, I don't want it. And to be honest, I have mixed views on remote work. I feel like there's a lot to be gained from remote work, and there's also a little bit to be lost, especially if you're a young person from remote work. Like, for example, when you, Danny, went to that, I don't know what you called it. It was like a drinks night or like a kind of like open bar night with that startup that you worked at for 5 years.
Right.
If that had been a Zoom call, maybe they'd be like, yeah, I like Danny, he's a cool guy. Then they've forgotten about you. But when you're able to kind of bounce off people, joke, laugh, whatever, they can get a feel for you. There's something about being in person with people that builds a different connection. So I wonder if you can talk to me about the kind of the current state of remote work. I know remote work has been a thing for the last decade, but in the last 4 years, it's become commonplace that people are, one, expecting some element of remote work, and two, there is a completely different skill set as a manager or a C-suite executive or an entrepreneur to dealing with remote workers and remote teams and making sure that they, one, are getting things done, and two, doing them well. So please talk to me about that.
Yes. Yeah. It's a really good question, and you've prefaced it well, because I will preface this with, I agree completely. There is something to be lost with remote work, and I have had moments where, you're right, when I went to Poke and joined them in the office, for their evening catch up and then for happy hour, the experience would not, 100% would not have been the same if it were a Zoom call. That being said, Apollo 21 is and has since its inception been fully remote, and I stand by that as well. And for me, it is a toss-up. You have to go into a remote mentality understanding what you were giving up, but you also have to understand what you're gaining. And so we've been remote since day one, for example, because as a small up-and-coming company, the cost of an office is obscene. Like, full stop. Our financials would look dramatically different if I were trying to support an office. Beyond that, if you have an office and you expect people to be in that office, then you have dramatically limited the people that you can hire to do good work for you because they live within driving distance or not. And what we gain by having access to people globally, not even just nationally, but anywhere in the world, in my opinion, far outweighs the benefit of the in-person happy hour. And that's coming from somebody who believes highly in the benefit of the in-person happy hour. So that being said, what remote brings to the table that I really appreciate is an ability for people to be people. So I have a team of people. I have a head of product who I love absolutely dearly, who has 6 kids, for example. I cannot begin to imagine what it takes to keep up with 6 kids and enjoying the aspects of parenting, of going to the basketball games and, the school plays and the whatever. And he knows that when his kid's got a basketball game, he gets up and he goes to the basketball game, because we believe in the value of people having their own lives and being able to be adults, to make decisions around, you know what? I know what work is on my plate. I know how long it's going to take me to get done. I know when it's due. And I know my kid's got a basketball game. Damn it, I'm going to the basketball game, because those are important. And so for me, all of that comes down to trust and accountability. So I hire people who are good at their jobs. I trust them to do their work, to execute it well, to manage their schedule, to be communicative about when they are and are not available. And then I hold them accountable to that. And sure, we've run into, problems here and there with people who didn't fit the culture, or who, for whatever reason, weren't being communicative enough, or weren't helping us understand what was going on in their world so that we could manage the work around that. And for me, it's just another metric by which employees end up getting measured, and we deal with those issues if and when they come up. But the trade-off for allowing people to feel like people, to feel like they're not punching a time card for the sake of sitting around from 9 to 5, far outweighs whatever happens when you're in a room together. And yes, we have to work a little harder to create opportunities for that collaboration to happen, and for people to get to know each other in the same way that they might if we were hanging out after a really rough week and grabbing a drink or whatever. And it puts the onus on, the company and me to make sure that we try to bring those people together on occasion when we can. And, I wish I could tell you that we have a quarterly company-wide offsite where everybody meets up in person. And unfortunately, we just can't afford to do that yet. But I see the value in it, and I understand how that helps pick up the slack for what you don't get on the week-over-week basis. I think that a lot of the return to work, or return to office, I guess, work is the wrong word. A lot of the return to office push that we're seeing comes from organizations that are full of managers that just can't get over the trust and accountability side of things. And to me, that's a management problem. It is not a employee problem. That is people being afraid of not having enough control or micromanagement control over their employees to allow them to enjoy the benefits of being fully remote. And so, of course, you see a lot of companies saying, well, yeah, that's why we do hybrid. And I cannot get over the idea of hybrid. I mean, to me, it is return to office with a hint of freedom. Like, okay, I appreciate the fact that maybe I don't have to be in the office every day, but you have still now dictated that I have to live in some city, that I have to live within commuting distance of that office, et cetera, et cetera. And so to me, it's almost like the worst of all worlds, with the occasional like, oh, okay, but I get to work from home on a Friday. Like, all right, I get it. But at the same time, I don't know. It's the worst of everything to me. It's just like, cool. So now I got to move across the country to work at a job where I'm going to go in 2 or 3 days a week, pay the cost of living in, I don't know. I live in New York City by choice because we are remote, but it's an edict that just doesn't make sense to me. And it's a byproduct of companies that are trying and failing to accommodate the trust and accountability means freedom.
Yeah, 100%. And there's this weird tick box, right, that people have in their companies. It's like, oh, we offer healthcare, we offer a pension. Hey, there's some remote work, but not too much because I need to micromanage you. And if I'm not micromanaging you, then I'm losing my job. And an author that I know
Right.
called Bent Fleeberg, he said to me once, he said, Sam, you don't manage people, you manage things. I'm like, okay, so he thinks people are things. He's like, no, 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 no. Things, the tasks that they do. That is how you
Yes.
manage people. You assign them tasks, you trust them to do it, and you assess them on the tasks that they've done. You don't assess them on who they are or how they're doing it. You assess them on the time it was taken to do that task and the quality of the outcome. And so you mentioned there about, being a good manager, and part of that is trusting your employees to do what they're doing, allowing them to have freedom and allowing them to live a life. But one thing I want to ask you, as someone who's got an organization that's growing and scaling, how do you set these people KPIs and tasks and things to kind of drive towards so that you're achieving the overall mission of Apollo 21?
For us, it depends what's happening at any given time. And so, generally, especially when we are focused on client work, for example, the KPIs that we're using are we delivering to the client's expectations roughly within the timetable that, we have vocalized to them? And if we're not, then why and what's getting in the way? And is it an us problem, or, we've run into times where delays were a client problem. We aren't getting the information that we need. We aren't getting the feedback that we need. I I personally thrive in organizations that in the past have been described as a meritocracy, which I frankly don't agree with, but it was sort of how I cut my teeth and learned about it. And in that world, it was the people who thrived were the people that put their all into what they were doing and, focused on doing the task at hand to the best of their ability and asking questions and, coming to the table with ideas as opposed to just problems. It's one of the things that drives me nuts is when, you get an employee or a teammate or whoever that comes to you and says, I have a problem. Great. Do you have an idea for a solution? It may be wrong. It may not be perfect. It may not be complete, but at least come to me with, some semblance of I have a problem and I have given it some thought and therefore this is what I think, but here's the part where I'm struggling, or do you agree with this, or will this fulfill on the need, et cetera, et cetera. And so the people that demonstrate that level of autonomy are, I think, the people who thrive in remote organizations, the people who understand that there's a sense of pride that comes out of doing that work and doing it well and being involved in something that's new and interesting and unique and so on and so forth. And those are the types of people that we tend to work really well with. And, that's not always the easiest thing to assess when you're interviewing somebody, for example, or when you're looking for something new. And so a lot of it just comes down to articulating what the culture is, what the expectations are, and then giving people a chance to thrive or not. And, some of it comes down to you have these moments where you just talk to somebody and you go, oh yeah, that person thinks the way that I do. And it's a gut feel. It's not because you asked, what is your biggest weakness in an interview? It's because you had a conversation with that person and you can just sort of get that feel of, oh yeah, the words that this person uses and the way that they describe what they want from their work and how they approach their work all resonates for me and makes sense to me and feels familiar to me, versus somebody who wants to be told what to do, wants to be given the answer, comes with problems without the solution that I've just described. And I've had the great fortune of having a couple of folks in my world who, both of whom I'm referring specifically to the guys that are on my leadership team now. And I hired both of them out of past companies and had hired them at those past companies for precisely the reason that I'm describing. Our interviews didn't feel like interviews. They felt like hanging out. And so in a way, it kind of comes back to what we're talking about with remote work as well, is sometimes that culture just gels and you can feel it immediately with the person on the other end. And so for me, one of the benefits is that those moments don't necessarily require the happy hour to make you feel like you have that camaraderie and the trust and the similar sensibility that you do with those teammates. And I won't argue that it can't be strengthened through in-person outings and work and, the fiery all-nighters where you're dragging bottom and trying to get through something because it's due can really be team building moments. But at the same time, if you find the right people, if you look for those people, and if you know what you're looking for when you're, interviewing, for example, then you can begin to build some of that culture in just by finding the folks that align.
100%.
I don't know if I've answered your question at all.
No, you have. You kind of explained here how you find the people you find, and as well as, the direction you lead them in, which is a great thing to do. And Danny, something I want to ask you is something that I ask every guest, but the question is quite broad, but the answer will be unique to you. And considering what we've spoken about over the last hour here, that there's all this kind of stuff around innovation, making sure that you're still being creative, still keeping things going in your business, keeping up with trends, as well as, empowering people to do the work they need to do. But what I want to ask you, Danny, is what is it about what you do that brings you the most joy?
For me, it all comes down to problem solving. I have learned about myself that I have this innate curiosity and an innate need to solve a problem when I see it. And so for me, the joy out of the work that I do in part is the variety of types of problems and types of organizations and things that I get to interact with, because we are a service company. No two clients come to us with the same problem. For the most part, they often come from entirely different industries or spaces. And I mean, we've done work. We spent a year and change working with a company focused on rodeos and Western sports, for example. Never in a million years did I expect that my technology career would leave me focusing for a year and learning an absolute ton about the world of rodeo. But it was fascinating. And I got to go to rodeos and I got to think about and talk to and interview fans of rodeos and rodeo athletes and all sorts of crazy things. And so it's the uniqueness and the opportunity and the, really the problem solving. It's like everything just sort of starts to look like a puzzle and you go, oh, interesting. Okay. You're drowning in email. Why are you drowning in email? What question do I need to ask to figure out why you're drowning in email? Well, let me ask this question. And it's just the unpacking and the slow unfurling of, oh, interesting. Oh, okay. You said this and that probably impacts over here. And it just aligns beautifully for whatever reason to the way that my brain works. And it's what really gets me excited is the moment of, how do I crack that thing? There's got to be a solution. And there's got to be some way that technology can play into it. Like how? And it'll bug me. It'll just keep me up at night until I, hit that aha moment of, oh, you're drowning in emails because somebody told every single person that started at your company that when they needed this to email that person and when they needed that to email that person. Well, yeah, of course you're drowning in email. How do we fix it? And then it's a whole new problem to solve, and it just sort of snowballs and keeps going.
Where can the people find you online?
The easiest place to find us is apollo21.io, number1.io. We have a whole stack of case studies that elaborate on how we do the type of work that I've been blabbing about and who we've done it for. We have articles and white papers and so on and so forth to hopefully help folks understand what they're going through. I, of course, am on all of the usual social media spots. I am blah, 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 / among many on most social media. Apollo21, of course, is also active on social media. If you're listening and you happen to be from New York, I also host a monthly Founders Dinner and a monthly Innovators Dinner that is actually a real live in-person sit down and eat dinner together type of thing. So if you're interested in that, please look me up, give me a shout. And if you want to email me for some reason, I am D as in Danny, N as in Nathan, dn@apollo21.io.
Thank you for listening to People Explained. New episodes come out every Monday. We would appreciate it if you gave us a review on Apple Podcasts and shared this episode with a friend.